On Primetime Politics tonight, more upheaval at Defence as the just-appointed Chief of the Defence Staff steps aside facing allegations of sexual misconduct. The Minister of National Defence is here to answer questions about that. Canada's Auditor General joins me to discuss the federal government's failings on shipbuilding, on rail safety, and on drinking water in First Nations communities. And could the rapid spread of COVID-19 variants lead to another big spike in infections? And we'll begin tonight with another senior Canadian defence commander under investigation. The newly appointed Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Art McDonald, has voluntarily stepped aside while he's being investigated for sexual misconduct. Admiral McDonald was just appointed by the Prime Minister in December to the top post at National Defence. McDonald took over the top job at Defence from General Jonathan Vance, who is now himself under investigation for allegations of sexual misconduct. The day McDonald took over from Vance, he spoke about his commitment to reforming the culture in the Canadian Forces.
I apologize to you, my teammates, our teammates, who have experienced racism, discriminatory behavior, and/or hateful conduct. I am deeply sorry. I want you to know that I will do all that I can to support you, to stop these unacceptable acts from happening, and to put into practice our guiding principle: respect the dignity of all persons. Creating a respectful environment is a responsibility that we all share, and I believe that together we can eliminate racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, and discrimination from our ranks.
Harjit Sajjan is Canada's Minister of Defence, and you can see he's with me now. Minister, good to see you again. Thanks for taking time to speak with me.
Likewise. Good to see you again.
Look, what can you tell us about the nature of the allegation or allegations against Admiral McDonald?
One thing, I can't talk about any investigation. That's for obvious reason. We have to allow for an independent investigation to occur. But one thing I can tell you, how seriously we take any allegation. We have an absolute zero tolerance policy. And as I've stated before, regardless of rank, regardless of position, that we will take action. And what I also can say, as I stated in my statement before, that he has voluntarily stepped aside, gone on leave, and that I have appointed Lieutenant General Wayne Eyre as acting Chief of Defence Staff.
Right. So when you say that you won't hesitate to take action, he voluntarily stepped aside. So what action did you take?
Is to appoint an acting chief of defence staff, and that the current investigation will take its course. This is how a process works: is making sure that any allegation that comes forward, we take immediate action on it, which is so that the allegation can be thoroughly investigated, because that's exactly what is needed to making sure that there's a fair process.
What did you know? What did you know about an investigation before he stepped aside? When did you find out there were questions about Admiral McDonald?
Well, the only thing I can say is it's very recent, but unfortunately, because of there's an ongoing investigation, I cannot give more. I know there's going to be a lot of questions on this, but for obvious reasons, as Minister of National Defence, I can't talk about the investigation because
but you can talk about you can talk about your actions though, and he voluntarily stepped aside. So when did it come to your attention that there was an investigation into Admiral McDonald? That what we have here is an investigation that's been underway for some amount of time, and he voluntarily stepped aside. You didn't ask him to resign. You didn't fire him. He stepped aside. So, what exactly were you told, and what did you know before Admiral McDonald decided he would voluntarily step aside?
Well, when it comes, I can tell you that it has been recent, but when it comes to when an NIS actually starts an investigation, that is up to them. They're completely independent of how investigations
Right, but when were you told he was under investigation?
As I stated, I can't, when it comes to this, it was very recent. Unfortunately, I can't provide any more information on that because there's an ongoing investigation.
Right, I'm not asking for details about the investigation. When were you told he was under investigation?
Even there, given the legal advice that I've been given, I would be interfering with the investigation by providing anything more than that. And one thing I can assure you, that we take things very seriously, and that's why we've taken the appropriate action in this case here. We want women to feel come forward if they want to, but to let them know that they will be heard, that their allegations will be taken seriously, and that there will be, and at the same time, once the appropriate investigation occurs, the appropriate action will be taken.
Okay, you've talked about women coming forward. So will you confirm that these are allegations of sexual misconduct involving a female crew member a decade ago aboard a Canadian warship? Can you confirm that when Admiral McDonald was a captain taking part in northern exercises? You just said you want women to feel they can come forward. So is this a case of sexual misconduct?
But as you know, that I cannot talk about any investigation. And the question that you're asking, any type of answer that I give is an interference in the independence of the investigation. All I can say is that we will take allegations extremely seriously and take the appropriate action.
Okay, this is the man who's heading, this is Canada's top soldier. What do you think Canadians have, and there is due process, let's be clear about that, but what do you think Canadians should be told here about the nature of the allegations against him? Do they have a right to know whether it's about misappropriation of funds, whether it's about something else, whether it's about sexual misconduct? Do you think Canadians have a right to know what's happening here?
Obviously, Canadians do have a right to know, but in our democracy, the police are independent of any political system. And in this case here, that's exactly what is happening. It'll be up to them to conduct the investigation, and at the appropriate time, the information will be allowed to come out. But it can only be done once the investigation is completed. I do not have the authority to be able to release that information, nor should we. That's interference. That's part of the reason why we have to make sure that we have fairness in the process. When somebody does come forward, we want to allow them the opportunity so that to have their information heard, to have an investigation that's done, have fairness in the process. So if their justice needs to be done, it's done in the appropriate way.
Okay, so let me circle back here. I'm not talking about his role. I understand there are limitations on what you can say about that. I'm talking about your role and your government's role. Did you or anyone else in your government know about the allegations or investigation when your government appointed Admiral McDonald to replace General Vance in December?
One thing I can say, these allegations were recent, and that action was immediately taken. What I can also say that the selection process was extremely thorough, but any action that was taken was done very recently.
Okay, so you're saying that you were not aware of any investigation or allegations when he was appointed to the job in December?
I can assure you that everything was that we have learned was recent.
Okay. What have you been told?
I don't know how I get to answer that question. What I can tell you, in terms of when I can't talk about any investigation, it is independent. And I'm sorry to keep repeating that, but it's very important for me to say. But what's really important here is the actions that we're taking. That the zero tolerance policy, that regardless of rank, regardless of position, that we are going to be taking the appropriate action here. We want women to feel comfortable to come forward with their information so that they can be heard, because this is exactly what is needed. And they need to know that regardless of rank, whether you're Admiral General or even a corporal, right, that you will get the fair opportunity to have your allegations heard and investigated.
All right, but they also, I mean, look what's happening around General Vance. Now we have an investigation into Admiral McDonald. So, this once again does raise, I think you'd acknowledge, questions about the vetting process. And I guess people wonder, why is there an investigation underway into allegations of some kind of inappropriate behavior involving the new Chief of the Defence Staff after he's been appointed? And I know you say this has come to light recently. So in terms of the vetting process, I think there are really only a couple of options here. Either the vetting process failed or the vetting process turned a blind eye. Which is it?
One thing I can assure you, there was no blind eye turn. We are very serious when it comes to any type of behaviors like this. We want the appropriate leadership in charge of the Canadian Armed Forces. A very thorough process was taken place. But regardless of what process that was taken, any allegation that ever comes up, regardless of what time, needs to be thoroughly investigated, and that's exactly what has been done. As I stated, we need to take the appropriate action, and that's exactly what is happening here.
Just very quickly, I'm out of time, just a quick final question. It's raised renewed calls now for outside oversight. The military investigates itself, and that's what's happening in this case. Are you considering an independent inspector general to oversee these kinds of cases in the military, or perhaps calling in the RCMP to examine these allegations?
Well, first of all, the current CFNIS is actually independent of the chain of command. However, everything is
does it not report to the Deputy Chief of Defence Staff?
When it comes to the investigation, it is independent of the chain of command. The Provost Marshal, when it comes to the organization, does report to the Vice Chief of Defence Staff. Mm-hmm. But when it also comes to independence of the current investigation, that's a decision that CFNIS and the investigators will have to make on their own. Having said this, given the whole context of the culture change that we're looking at, everything is currently on the table. We will look at the various independence the independence of organization so that we can make improvements to the system.
All right, Defence Minister Harjit Sajjan, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it, sir.
Great, thank you.
All right, we've heard from the Minister of Defence on this developing story involving the newly appointed Chief of the Defence Staff. Now let's hear from opposition MPs. James Bezan is the defence critic for the official opposition, and Randall Garrison is the defence critic for the NDP. Gentlemen, thanks for your time tonight. Mr. Bezan, the Minister says these allegations against Admiral McDonald came to light and the investigation began after he was appointed. We're hearing it started a month or so ago, but the point he's suggesting is that the government had no knowledge of this prior to the appointment. So do you accept that explanation?
Look, I am angry and upset that here we are with the second CDS under investigation, a cloud of secrecy being spouted out by Minister Sajjan, not explaining to Canadians or to our troops why the CDS has had to step aside and what the allegations or why the investigation has taken place. So, you know, we're hearing, based upon media reports, that this investigation started before he was appointed the CDS. We don't know what it is. We don't know if it's part of the investigation into John Vance. We don't know if it's allegations against him directly. It could be, you know, misconduct on all different types of levels. And, you know, we shouldn't be left to speculation. The minister should provide clarity, because Canadians and our troops deserve to know. We have you know, the confidence and trust of everyone in the leadership, including Minister Sajjan, being eroded because of this shroud of secrecy that they continue to cover themselves in, and that has to stop.
Mr. Garrison, what's your view here on how this story is unfolding and what the minister is prepared to say or not say?
Well, the clear implication here, this is another allegation of sexual misconduct that we're dealing with. And I will give Admiral McDonald credit for stepping aside at this point. And I guess my main question to the Minister of Defence goes back to, if you want Canadians to have confidence, and if you want people in the military to have confidence that you're taking sexual misconduct seriously, then you have to do more than just say we have zero tolerance. That's an aspiration. It's not a policy. It's not an action. And so what we need to know in this case is, when did the minister know about the allegations of the Chief of Defence Staff? Because what seems to be the case was that the minister knew for more than 2 years, nearly 3 years, and the Chief of Defence Staff was able to serve out his term and retire with honor and get a pay increase, all while being accused of sexual misconduct.
Well, you're talking about, just to be clear, you're talking about General Vance here.
General Vance. Yeah. That if all of that is true, then how can anyone have confidence that the government is taking seriously the attempts to get rid of sexual misconduct in the military?
But where we are now, Mr. Bezan, there's due process required here. This is the top soldier in the land. So I guess how much should we be told about the allegations while an investigation is still underway?
We don't want to politically interfere in the investigation, but it is inherent upon the minister to explain why there's an investigation. Why is there, why did Admiral McDonald have to step to the side? And I agree with Randall. It's a good thing he did, because we want to make sure that there is no way that they can intimidate that investigation as the country's top
and
commander.
Do you find it interesting the minister, and I asked him a number of times that in his answer, look, that he voluntarily stepped aside. So he wasn't fired, and he wasn't ordered to step aside by the sounds of it. Does that raise other questions? that he was allowed to say, look, I'm
lots of questions. Again, we have Minister Sajjan not doing his job as Minister of National Defence. We had retired Colonel Michel Drapeau, who's a military justice expert, say that under the General Vance allegations that there was a lot that the minister is responsible for doing, including starting a board of inquiry into these allegations. Back when we first learned about them, like Minister Sajjan was told about Vance's allegations back in March of 2018, 3 years ago. And here we are, and we're still only getting down to the basis of that of this whole investigation.
Oh, okay, Mr. Garrison.
Men and women who serve this country deserve to have a safe and respected work environment. And that is what, at the end of all of this, we have to ensure that they are properly taken care of.
All right, Mr. Garrison, time's running tight here, but let me get to you. Does this call out for a different way of doing things here? We have what people have referred to as the military investigating itself here. Does there need to be an independent oversight, given what seems to be these continuing problems in the Department of National Defence?
Well, I guess what I would say first off is that the NDP has been calling for a military ombudsman that reports to Parliament, that has full independence and does not report to the Minister of Defence. We've been calling for that for the whole 10 years I've been in Parliament. And that would be a good start on being able to get some answers to these questions. And we wouldn't be dependent, as we are in this case, of the minister saying, well, he reports to me and he reported to me, but I can't tell you what he told me. If we had an independent military ombudsman, then that officer would report to Parliament and we would get some real answers about what's happened here.
All right. Well, the minister, at the end of our interview, suggested he's open to other ways of doing things, and that idea of outside oversight is one of them, he has said. So, gentlemen, thank you both for your time. We'll continue to follow this story, but take care.
Thank you.
Canada's Auditor General has issued a series of new reports today identifying some good and, well, not so good results for the way key federal programs are being managed. Let's start with shipbuilding. The Auditor General found the national shipbuilding strategy missed the mark on delivering new vessels in time to meet Canada's domestic and international obligations, and attempts to address the delays were not effective. Several vessels may have to be retired before the replacements have been delivered. On First Nations drinking water, that audit cited a lack of funding and outdated policies for slowing efforts to provide safe drinking water. Long-term water advisories remain in effect in 60 First Nations. 28 of those are more than 10 years old. On rail safety, the Auditor General found Transport Canada doesn't know whether its improved oversight measures have actually worked to improve rail safety. And despite repeated recommendations over the past 14 years, Transport Canada hasn't bothered to measure the performance of the safety management systems implemented by the railway companies. Canada's Auditor General Karen Hogan joins me now. Auditor General, good to see you. It's our first chance to speak, so congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Let's begin with the shipbuilding audit. This is kind of like a broken record for Canadians on defence procurement. Can you explain why almost all of these major shipbuilding projects are so backed up, and who's to blame for that?
So in our audit on the national shipbuilding strategy, we looked at whether or not the government was managing the contract in a way so that the ships would arrive in a timely fashion. And what we found is that there were delays, and those delays were, I believe, as a shared responsibility between both the government and the shipyards. What we saw were delays and uncertainty in sort of the design and needing to refine that, which then led to delays in production. And once the first ship, which is a really critical one to get built, is delayed, there's a bit of a ripple effect on all the other ships. The shipyards also had not yet achieved their target state. And target state is a really important metric to make sure that you don't deal with the sort of boom and bust of the shipbuilding industry, and that there's a consistent flow in order to manage the delivery of ships that were needed under the strategy.
All right. Only 2 of the 4 new vessels scheduled for delivery in January you found of last year were actually delivered, and both were late. How concerned are you that old vessels will have to be in fact retired before replacement vessels are ready in some of these key procurement programs?
So I am quite concerned because there was, as you said, lots of delays, and the department did take some action during our audit in order to be able to realign and hopefully put the strategy back on track. But there's very little wiggle room, and some of that wiggle room likely was eaten up by some of the delays on the government side and the shipyard side because of the pandemic. And so the government really does need to stay focused now on monitoring how that strategy goes forward, so that further delays aren't suffered, because interim capabilities will only last so long.
Okay, let's turn to drinking water and First Nations communities. What's it going to take for the federal government to finally resolve these problems with drinking water in Canadian First Nations communities?
I have to tell you, I'm rather disheartened by the whole situation with the drinking water. I think it's completely unacceptable, and I'm sure that anyone who reads our audit report would agree that in Canada in 2021, there are so many First Nations communities that don't have access to safe drinking water. What we saw as some of the reasons for the government not meeting its commitment to raise all long-term drinking water advisories by March of this year was a few things. We saw a funding formula that was quite outdated, almost 30 years since it has been looked at. And that really makes sure that the First Nations have the adequate resources. And right now, the financial resources aren't meeting their needs. And you saw that by operators who, they can't really retain skilled operators for the water systems, because right now they're earning about 30% less than their counterparts. So there is that, and then there's also sort of the legislative framework that's needed there. There is an act that was put in place, but the guidelines that really put the act into tangible terms for people haven't been worked on yet. So there's a few things that they need to work on to find long-term solutions.
Let's finish. There were 5 reports today. I'm dealing with 3 of them tonight. Let's talk about rail safety. Transport Canada has implemented a whole bunch of new oversight measures, but are they working?
Well, I think that's exactly what we found in our audit, that we were pleased to see that they had made progress on the recommendations that we made in 2013. So this audit was a follow-up of the audit we did 8 years ago. And we found that they took extra action. So they were doing more inspections and following up on the corrective measures that rail companies were taking. They actually increased some of their audits on the safety management systems in railway companies. But where it fell short, and it's a really important thing, is that they weren't measuring whether or not all this increased activity was actually having an impact on rail safety. And if you're going to invest that much time and effort and money, it's important to know whether those resources are actually making a difference.
Okay, just to quickly finish off, I always ask auditors this final question. Is your office satisfied with the level of cooperation and commitment to action that you receive from the government from these audits?
We are satisfied with the interaction that we had during the audits with all the departments that we audited. Absolutely. I do have to say that I'm concerned by the length of time that it's taken to take action on rail safety, and honestly very saddened by the state of lack of access to drinking water. But there's a goodwill there, and it's time to really take action to look at sort of those root causes and whether or not the government's actions are making a real difference in the lives of Canadians. All
right, Canada's Auditor General Karen Hogan, thank you for your time this evening. Good to talk to you.
Thank you. You too.
Well, COVID-19 infections continue to moderate mostly across Canada. There's concern, though, about the spread of variants of concern and how they might drive cases back up. Modeling numbers released in Ontario today suggest the variants could make up about 40% of all cases in Ontario by the second week of March. And that would likely result in a spike in new cases and hospitalizations. In a worst-case scenario, Ontario could be looking at 4,000 new cases a day by the end of March. Raywat Deonandan is an epidemiologist and associate professor at the University of Ottawa. He frequently joins us to talk about the latest on the pandemic. He's with us now. Ray Deonandan, thanks for being with me again tonight. Look, there's concerns across Canada over the rise and spread of COVID-19 variants of concern. These new Ontario models suggesting as many as those 40% of all new infections caused by variants by mid-March. How worrisome is that?
It's pretty worrisome. Now, the likelihood of a third wave has always been based on whether or not the new variants would become dominant. In fact, the variants will probably be the mechanism of a third wave. So as we're opening up the economy in parts of the country, that's what we're concerned about, the rate at which these new variants take hold and become dominant.
The Ontario public health officials today called it akin to a minefield lying ahead of the people of Ontario. What's the best way to get through it?
Okay, so the rate of increase in cases is dependent on several factors. Number one is the amount of contacts that we have. This is why lockdowns work. We limit the number of contacts. Number two is characteristics intrinsic to the virus, the extent to which the degree of infection matters, the extent to which the infectious load matters. We can't control those things. We can control the amount of susceptibility in the population through vaccination. So again, two things we can control: the amount of contacts we have and the amount of vaccination we deploy. That's what will get us out of this.
All right. We're already seeing cases creep back up somewhat in parts of Ontario as the restrictions and stay-at-home orders are lifted. Do these latest modeling numbers suggest that we need to be headed back to more restrictions? Is there any other way to prevent things from getting not just bad, but really bad?
It might mean that, but there are some other tools on the table, like better contact tracing and testing, voluntary restriction of contacts. We don't have to rush out to the grocery store all the time. We don't have to go meet our friends at the restaurants even though they're open. We don't have to go to the gym even though it's open. We can voluntarily restrict. And of course, vaccination. Vaccination is our best way to harden our population against this eventuality. Nothing is written in stone. These aren't predictions handed down by the oracle. These are likely scenarios given possible behaviors and choices for us.
The provinces are stepping up their vaccination plans and laying out plans for the order of vaccinations in many cases. Ontario lagging a little bit behind in vaccinations, and certainly questions about why it's taking till mid-March to set up an online registration system, and questions about who will administer the shots. Do you think should we have been better prepared than we are at this point?
I think it's pretty clear we should have been better prepared. Look, we knew we'd need an online system months ago. Why is it taking this long to get one? Other countries, other states, other jurisdictions have them. We could use theirs and adapt them. I think we probably are. This could be handled well at the public health unit. So I think one good thing we're doing is handing down the responsibility to the local officials who have a long history of doing this kind of thing. So I have every faith that our local public health officials can handle this. But they have to be given the time and the resources to manage it.
All right, lots to watch in the days and weeks ahead. As always, great to talk to you, Raywat Deonandan. Take care. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for another edition of Primetime Politics from all of us here at CPAC. Thanks for watching. Until next time.